So to start off, I just want to make it clear that I am not a film person, or I'm not going to be coming at this analysis thing. I'm not going to be coming at this from the perspective of a person who studies film. I'm not going to talk about the technicality of it. I will use the language of film theory just because I'm familiar with some of the language of film theory and I like film theory. But what I want to do, I'm going to be doing my makeup while I talk about this. What I want to do is mostly touch on not a metaphorical aboutness, although there will be some of that, but kind of an emotional why I care about this thing. Why, I mean, you don't have to care, but why you could care about this thing also, if you identify with any of the emotionality that I'm gonna lay out. Just basically why has my brain been so rotted by Gregg Araki films that I can't stop talking about this man, you know? Just in case anyone was curious. So I've made references to Gregg Araki's work a couple times, mostly on my Instagram. I've touched on my favorite film of his, which is The Doom Generation, and how it's not a good movie, at least I don't think, but it stuck with me regardless, and I want to put into words why that is. I haven't watched every single Gregg Araki film. I have the attention span of a wall gecko, but the films that I have watched have resonated with me in a way that media often doesn't. I'll get into the why of why they resonate with me personally later, but first I'm going to talk about queer nightmare theater. I guess I don't want to say that I coined this term because I don't think it's even an accurate term. But I use this concept to categorize a kind of film that's a little bit surreal and melodramatic and sad and longing and, as the name implied, full of a kind of repressed gay energy. I'm going back and forth about the nightmare part, because while these films do contain horror elements, they're not scary, or at least they're not scary in the typical horror movie sense. Thematically, we'll get to it. You know when you have a nightmare and everything feels kind of close to being reality, but everything's kind of hazy and slow and the lighting's kind of weird and the faces are kind of weird, but it feels almost real, and that's what makes it scary, is that it could be real but it's not quite. You're kind of aware that something's off. It's the uncanny valley effect. Gregg Araki films kind of do that, they feel very much like liminal spaces, and they feel very much like liminal spaces that I think as a queer person feel very, very familiar in ways that are daunting, and ways that are kind of comforting but ultimately kind of heartbreaking, So originally with this video I was gonna lay out a timeline of Gregg Araki's films from his starts as a more indie director to his kind of more mainstream work. I was gonna track it from Nowhere, Doom Generation, Smiley Face, to kind of go this is his early shit, this is when he's kind of come into his own style, and then this is when he's doing stoner comedies, but still with his Gregg Araki twist. I'm not gonna track his films like that because I'm kind of stuck on the liminal space thing, especially as it relates to queerness. So I'm just gonna talk about what Nowhere feels like, and I'll maybe touch on why I enjoy the Doom Generation so much, even though it's really not a good movie, but why I specifically enjoy it so much, and why it's one of my favorite movies, even though again, it's kind of bad. Smiley Face is cool too, I guess, but it's a stoner comedy that you can't really watch while you're high, because it just, I don't know, it just makes you feel like damn, I should really stop smoking weed, you know? Like, every single time I've watched it while I was high, I was like, damn, is this a good decision? This thing that I'm doing right now, is this good? So if you like that kind of thing, then I would say go for it. So Nowhere is one of Gregg Araki's earlier films. Not his earliest, but definitely one of his earlier like films. And you can tell that he's still figuring out his style, like visually, because he has certain like Araki isms. I'm not really into auteur theory, but like when you look at certain directors' works, even though like a film is made up of the contributions of like a bunch of people, and I think auteur theory, like the idea that a filmmaker is like the sole author of a film, like some people will like look at a film and be like, that's a Kubrick film, or that's a Jordan Peele film, even though like there are writers, editors, set designers, costume designers, there's the actors. Like, a film is not the product of just one dude who's like just kind of enacting his like great artistic vision or whatever. But there are some directors, there are some filmmakers where you look at their work and you're like, there's a thing happening here. He keeps doing this thing. He like has a thing that he's doing. Like Kubrick has like, you know, the Kubrick stare and long shots and etc. and etc. And Tarantino has his things. So you can definitely like pinpoint a filmmaker's isms. Gregg Araki tends to make films that are a little bit off, a little bit weird, very kind of like a mix of like violence, like hyper violence, not in like a Clockwork Orange kind of hyper violence, but like just shocking scenes of shocking violence mixed in with scenes of like this mundane just slice of life, but the place in which the setting of the slice of life is so bizarre it doesn't feel real. His films tend to occupy the space where it feels like, yeah, Gregg Araki's films tend to occupy this space where it's a mix of just like regular people, usually young people, usually like artsy queer people, doing like their regular shit, going about their business, just like having mundane conversations, and like scenes of like almost shocking, not quite like vivid, not gory, but just kind of shocking violence, or where something kind of upsetting happens, and it's surreal and it's a little bit comical, and these two things are kind of like mixed together and switched in and out. So like visually he's got that, and then like another feature of a Gregg Araki film is just the way that people speak. It's very much one of those worlds, one of those film worlds where you watch it and you think people don't talk like that, which like we have a whole conversation about like who critics tend to be like harder on when it comes to like that kind of thing. Like one could argue the filmmaking as like an art form is meant to capture experiences that are like close to reality but elevate those things. Like there are a few filmmakers who are able to capture just the natural way that people speak and the natural lull of conversations and just the natural rhythms and make that interesting, because like if you wanted to just watch people have a conversation, you could just go outside. Well, I mean, but people tend to watch films for escapism, and so they tend not to want to watch people speaking like anyone, like just anyone. They tend not to want that kind of thing. But when it comes to certain directors, some critics tend to be a lot harder. Like with a movie like Juno, a lot of people were really upset with the way that that film was written, because they thought that the speech and the language was just really unrealistic. But not to bring Tarantino in here twice, because I feel like if I say his name one more time, he's going to like jump out of my mirror and call me a nigger. But there are certain directors who just don't really get critiqued for that kind of thing. So it's always good to keep an eye on, like, well, why am I so hung up on them not speaking like normal people speak? Nowhere is kind of the saddest film that I've ever... No, that's not true. What Nowhere feels like to me is what it feels like to be like young and lonely and gay, and to be both on the inside and the outside, like, not to get poetic or whatever. The film follows like more or less like one main guy, but it follows like a group of people. It's an ensemble kind of thing, which again is another like kind of Araki-ism. He tends to like follow like a group of young people, but it's about like a group of young people who are just like going about their business, going about their doing. And then in the background of that, there are all these like acts of like violence taking place, and then behind all of that, like, here's the like surface of the film is like a group of young people doing young people artsy shit, and then behind that is like a kind of insidious underbelly of all the casual violence that takes place in this setting. And then behind that is like this narrative about how aliens are coming to invade, which like is on TV screens, and you, like, it gets referenced to from time to time. Like, people get disappeared. The news stations are talking about how like this is the end of the world and shit. But these like group of young people are still like, you know, doing their thing, because like, what does it matter? There's that certain like arrogance of youth where it's like, oh, the world is gonna end, that like, what party are we going to tonight? Especially when contrasted with these little acts of violence that are taking place like every day. A young woman gets sexually assaulted by a famous actor. A young man takes his life, like. And so when you've got things like that happening, when you've got like these like casual acts of brutality happening, oh, aliens are gonna kill us all, like, that's not the worst thing that's happened this week. And then the reason that I like am so attached to this film, and why Nowhere like resonates with me emotionally, is that there's just this quiet love story taking place between the main character and this like guy that he meets, like just meets him one time, like once, and they have this like quiet, really kind of intense love story in the middle of like all this shit that's going on. The action, like the insanity, just kind of ramps up and ramps up and ramps up, and you don't get a lot of like quiet moments up until the end of the film, when these like two boys are like laying in bed, just like sharing space with each other, just like looking at each other, and you can like feel the weight of what it means to like share contact with another person like that, as a queer person, like what it means to just not even inherently sexually, just to have this intimate, like really bare, really vulnerable moment with another person. I sound so fucking gay. And then as they're sharing this like romantic moment, they're sharing this intimacy, this quiet, they finally have some reprieve from all the fucking insanity. There's like a group of like genderqueer fucking people with guns just walking around robbing people, which like, period. There's this fucking alien in just like a lizard costume walking around just fucking disappearing people. People are dying. These like two 13-year-olds are trying to get to this fucking party and their car gets jacked by this like group mob of genderqueer people. Like there's just it's just shit happening. Shit is just happening. And you get to this one quiet cup. The one quiet moment in this movie is when two queer people are just sharing space with each other. And then one of them, spoiler warning, I guess. And then one of them fucking like explodes. It turns out that one of the aliens has laid an egg in him. And he just fucking explodes. And an alien bug crawls out of him and like crawls out the window. And his lover is just sitting like in bed, just watching this all happen. And the movie more or less ends there. And like I live for that kind of like disastrous bullshit. Like one of my favorite films is My Own Private Idaho, which like has like a couple scenes like that where you have a moment of like queer intimacy and then some bullshit happens, because like that's what it's like. Sometimes it is like so beautiful, like queer love or whatever. Sometimes it is so beautiful and so perfect and everything lines up just right, and then some bullshit happens, like some queer phobia, and it makes those like quiet, intimate, beautiful moments just like way more beautiful and way more important. I don't walk away from that movie being like, oh, being queer is like the ultimate tragedy and there's no happiness to be found, because moments like that negate that assumption. Like there are moments like that to be found. There can even be a lot of moments like that to be found. And just because some bullshit happens doesn't mean that those moments are any less beautiful or any less, or will stay with you for years any less. Like I still think about that scene fucking all the time. I think that another thing that Gregg Araki is really good at is capturing moments of like love and community that are not only like romantic love. Gregg Araki is a queer person, so he probably like he knows intimately that like while like these romantic moments can be beautiful, they can also be really fleeting, and they can be really intense. Like you meet someone, you look at them and you like fall in love with them, and then it can be really intense, because queer people don't really have the same sense of time. I'm not gonna get into it. There's this concept called heterotemporality that I'll probably talk about at some point, but like queer time is different than like typical heteronormative time, like philosophically I guess. But Gregg Araki kind of makes it a point to like follow these ensembles and follow more than one person, because I think he's like aware of just how much of queerness is like forming bonds and forming community with like other people who are like also queer, and not just romantically. Like the main character has a group of friends where two of the girls are dating, and he is like in a kind of poly, kind of not poly relationship with one of the girls. Gregg Araki loves polyamory. He does. Polyamorous king. But he makes sure to highlight like the romance and the beauty of these like other relationships too. Which brings me to the fucking Doom generation. Actually, no, the fuck it doesn't. This is a really long, the original cut of this is really fucking long, and I'm not gonna edit this all in one chunk. So I'm doing two parts to this. The first part is gonna go up on my Instagram, and then the second part is gonna be Patreon only. The second part is gonna be just the Doom generation, just talking about the Doom generation. And yeah, I just think that's kind of dope. That's pretty much it. That's all this video is. I just think Gregg Araki's kind of dope. Like, you don't even need to have watched all of this video. I just think he's sick. That's it. End of video. So I did write a script out, but I think I like going kind of off script and just talking a lot better. But let me know if you like got it. Did you get it? Did you get the thing? I think that I want to talk about sharp objects and like the specific trauma of being a girl child with like an abusive mother. Or we don't have to do all of that. Or I could do John Waters and just talk about John Waters and how he's an insane person from hell. I'll take a vote on my Patreon, and whatever the patrons vote is probably what the next video is going to be. The link in my bio of my Instagram is to my Patreon. You can subscribe and be a patron, and get access to this shit earlier, and access to like my art and illustration earlier, and in full color. And yeah, and maybe get discounts to prints and shit. I just started doing this Patreon thing, so I'm still trying to figure it out. But yeah, that's it.